Origins of MBM, or Management by Means. This very short video is a supplement to the video that I uploaded to YouTube, which recorded anew the presentation that was given for the Hoshin Masterclass, and that's Masterclass number 6, which covered the why of Hoshin Kanri. As you may remember, the audio of the WebEx recording was really terrible, and in consultation with Pam Westerlin, she and I decided that it would be better if we were not to upload that. It's really incomprehensible, and we will instead make sure that I record all of the moments that may not have been captured on the original presentation, which has now been recorded and, I said, I've already uploaded to YouTube. And Pam picked out this next slide as something that she would like me to talk about. This was shared after the main presentation and was not recorded in the rework of the presentation that I uploaded to YouTube. So here we are. This is a figure from the forthcoming second edition of Hoshin Kanri for the Lean Enterprise. And the purpose of the slide is to explain in a graphic way the origin of Hoshin Kanri, and which has roots in two competing approaches to management. On the far right, we find management by results. Now, what is management by results? It's a hierarchical line and staff approach to management, typical of most organizations during the era of big business, which I would say concluded with the launch of General Motors in 1919, but General Motors included a lot of that as well. The term management by results was coined by H. Thomas Johnson, a very famous accounting professor, actually, who teaches here in Portland, Oregon. And he's one of the three gentlemen who attempted to teach the accounting community activity-based costing. It was H. Thomas Johnson, Robin Cooper, and Robert Kaplan of Harvard. Robert Kaplan went on to write the Balanced Scorecard books. Johnson hates management by results. It is a play on another term called management by objectives, or MBO, which was created by Peter Drucker, perhaps the 20th century's foremost management guru. Drucker created this system by which every manager in a company would be engaged in setting targets for himself or herself as part of the annual budgeting process, which had become enshrined with General Motors' system of financial targets and internal audits. Financial targets and internal audits, as developed in General Motors in the period 1919 to 1921, is now called management accounting. And it really is, as a discipline, it hasn't changed much. That is, as it's taught in schools of business. When you go to a school of business and get an MBA or you get an accounting degree, you're very likely going to learn the management accounting created by Alfred Sloan, who was the CEO of General Motors. Well, 1919 is a very long time. It's 100 years ago. And Johnson and also Kaplan and Cooper have been arguing for decades that management accounting has become irrelevant. And Johnson perhaps is the most vocal of the three, and he calls it management by results, and he says it's a terrible thing. What we really need to do is this thing over here on the right, the far right, called management by means, or I'm going to refer to it as MBM. And this is how Toyota does things. Now we'll get there. We need to talk about something in between, which I call managing to learn. Actually, I didn't call it managing to learn. Most recently, John Shook has called it managing to learn in connection to his A3 program, which he described in Managing to Learn, the book published by Lean Enterprise Institute. But let's go back to management by results. Management by results is a control system, which we call management accounting, which many of you will be familiar with in its form of the annual budgeting process. Those of you who have lived inside of large corporations will understand the annual budgeting process, coupled with internal audits performed by a staff of professional accountants who typically report to the chief executive officer through the CFO. Sometimes we find it difficult to distinguish between internal audits and the external audits performed by certified public accountants. And there is a lot of sloppiness in people's thinking, even in the accountants' thinking. It is very important to keep in mind that the internal audit is not demanded by government. The internal audit was imposed by Alfred Sloan originally without any government guidance at all. In 1919, we were 10 years away from the Great Crash. It was the beginning of the Roaring '20s. All that Sloan was worried about was controlling his multiple divisions, which you will remember as Chevrolet, Cadillac, Buick, also Oldsmobile, and Pontiac, for those old geezers in the audience, GMC, Fisher Body, and so on. So the internal audit was really a private business invention, which was then later built upon by government regulators when they began to impose external audits requiring certified public accountants to be external and independent of the firms that they were auditing. All the while, the internal audit continued, and many people who perform those audits are not trained necessarily as management accountants. They do have a lot of training, but they will reach for the certificate of certified public accountant. The primary purpose of the CPA is to ensure that they are independent and can perform the external audit. So there is an argument within the profession about that, but let's not confuse the internal from the external audit. The internal audit is part of the organization's own control system. And Sloan needed a control system because he had begun to decentralize his management structure from the C-suite to divisions. Also, the divisions also had their own departments, and then ultimately to the front line. It was a relatively weak form of decentralization, as we will see, but it was extremely powerful in its own right. Henry Ford's company was driven to the very brink of bankruptcy, not more than 10, well, actually, in less than 10 years after Sloan invented management accounting. So this thing, management by results, was a very serious, very important innovation, and was later adopted around the world. It took at least 50 years for it to be adopted, but it was eventually adopted around the world as sort of the gold standard, and pretty much it is still the gold standard in the schools of business. We're still not anywhere closer to management by means, so let me take the next step and go on to managing to learn. This structure that we see in the middle, which is labeled as the Quality Circles Organization, was the invention of a Japanese consultant that most people will recognize. His name was Kaoru Ishikawa. And that, yes, it is that Ishikawa of the fishbone diagram. He was an extremely influential consultant within Japan. His father set up the the Japanese Union of Scientists and Engineers, which housed the Deming Prize and did so much work to promote total quality management within Japan after World War II. His son, Kaoru, sat on the governing body of the Deming Prize, and also had a very active consulting career. Toyota was one of his main clients. Now, Ishikawa invented something called quality circles, which became very, very important in Japan. I know about it. I first learned about it from Norman Bodek, who was instrumental in bringing lean manufacturing to the United States. He worked directly with Taiichi Ono, Shigeo Shingo, and Shingijutsu to bring lean manufacturing to the United States in the mid to late 80s. But back to Ishikawa. Before Norman became interested in lean manufacturing, he discovered quality circles and was promoting quality circles in the United States prior to his discovery of Taiichi Ono. And so what are quality circles and why are they important? So Ishikawa had been trained, of course, by W. Edwards Deming. And Ishikawa was looking for a way to get more people involved, in particular, more people on the very front line of manufacturing within Japan involved in applying PDCA. And he came up with this idea of quality circles. Now, what is a quality circle? Well, this is a relatively independent group of people on the very front line, including operators and maybe some project team members. And the purpose of these quality circles was to kind of mess around with TQM, but in a disciplined way. So to provide the discipline, Ishikawa suggested that they be governed by facilitators who reported to a quality circles office, who were connected to some coordinating committees scattered throughout the organization that was doing quality circles. Now, why is this not crystal clear language? This is an activity that was not necessarily connected to the company's strategy. This was an independent circle, so I'm saying the quality circles were more or less autonomous, and they were driven, they were led by their own instincts, not by a clear understanding of company policy or company strategy. But notice how this structure seems familiar. The idea of an office, of facilitators who are part of that office, who report to some sort of governing body, in this case a fairly loose governing body. You'll see, I'm going to argue that this was the beginning of the structure that we now recognize as a Kaizen promotion office. If you were in an agile organization, you would not have a Kaizen promotion office, you might have the office of the Scrum Master, because agile, derived from lean and also derived from TQM, is also a facilitated activity. So let's talk about this. This became hugely important in Japan. Many companies, certainly many of the leading companies, had these programs, and they were quite extensive. Now, this activity of the quality circles was going on side by side with the activity of management by results. In the mid-50s, Peter Drucker invents management by objectives. He writes a book about it, and the book takes off in Japan, and it creates a fad that lasted almost 20 years. Let that sink in. So for almost 20 years, you have the Japanese really going gaga over Peter Drucker, really trying to adopt his management by objectives, which I argue is what Johnson is alluding to when he talks about MBR, or management by results. You'll notice that the method of MBO is pretty much top-down, seeking to engage managers, but really we're talking about financial performance here primarily, with the budgeting, linked to the budgeting process and followed up by the internal audits. And you probably are very familiar with how closely correlated the financial audit is to the performance review. So that would be an interesting line of investigation. But the annual performance review and the internal audit are happening side by side in this top-down structure here on the left. So into this universe, as the Japanese are trying to sort of resurrect their manufacturing capability, they're learning from all these different sources, including the very innovative, if slightly traditional, Peter Drucker on the one hand, and W. Edwards Deming as interpreted by Ishikawa on the other hand. So we have a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach, but the two are not linked together. Now, I will argue that Ishikawa, once again, became instrumental in merging the two. He wrote papers about the need to link quality activity to the company's strategy. He must have been aware of the influence of Peter Drucker. By the mid-60s, which is about 3 or 4 years after Ishikawa invents quality circles, by the mid-60s, 64, 65, we have the formalization of Hoshin Kanri, which seems to marry the top-down approach of Peter Drucker and the bottom-up approach of quality circles. This, I think, is a major breakthrough. Ishikawa's wish to connect quality activity to the company's strategy was probably the first, as published in the Deming Prize criteria, which was, of course, Ishikawa had some influence over, maybe major influence. I don't know. I would have to do more research. But he certainly was close enough to the prize to understand what was going on. The first references are to quality policy, not to financial policy or financial strategy, or even, I go too far. The first references were to quality policy, but certainly by the mid 60s and in the late 70s, we see that what has actually happened is that the quality system and the financial system have somehow been smushed together into one system, which is both top-down, a la Peter Drucker, and bottom-up, a la Ishikawa. And this is Hoshin Kanri. It's a target-setting mechanism, which is both top-down and bottom-up. It is linked to semi-autonomous teams, not necessarily the autonomous teams of quality circles. And some companies that have implemented Hoshin have maintained the quality circle program almost apart from the more policy-driven activity of Hoshin. But still, those operators and the project teams have a new freedom. Now let's compare the semi-autonomous teams of Hoshin with the empowered divisional leaders of General Motors over here on the left. And in one version of this of this graph, I've actually laid in the divisions, but not for the book. The divisional leaders were semi-autonomous because they were given financial targets and then allowed to articulate how those would be achieved. So the style of the car, the market of the car, the options on the car were all within the decision-making process of the divisional leader, and they were quite distinct. The same autonomy has been extended to teams on the very front line of this management by means system. I'm calling it the radically decentralized organization. Actually, comparing it to a computer, I'll say that it's multi-core because it has thousands of cores or information processing units. If we think of the operators and project team members, as the information processing units. So here we have a way to explain how we got from the world of General Motors on the left to the world of Toyota, Porsche, and now Spotify and the bank ING in the Netherlands on the right. We have the top-down approach of Peter Drucker and Alfred Sloan from General Motors. married to the bottom-up approach of Ishikawa, who had studied with W. Edwards Deming. And we end up binding together the financial system on the one side and the quality system on the other side. What emerges is a balanced scorecard of financial targets and the way to get there, the what's and the how's. So this is also happening on the right-hand side of the diagram, that we have a move away from purely financial performance. We have a move toward more qualitative evaluations. A couple of authors, Hope and Fraser, have argued that on the left-hand side, when the managers are engaging with the company, they are signing fixed performance contracts. Kind of, it is not ours to reason why, it is ours but to do or die. You meet your numbers or you suffer the consequences. A fixed performance contract based upon a fixed annual budget. So it's kind of static. Actually, it's very static and not flexible. On the right-hand side, Hope and Fraser are arguing, look, we need to let go of the fixed performance contract and adopt something called the relative performance contract. In the second edition of Hosho and Connery for the Lean Enterprise, I'm making the case that what we call the A3 is probably better called a relative performance contract, to keep it in line with this development from management accounting a la Sloan into something entirely different over here on the right. One of the cases that I'm making in the second edition of the book is that management by means is going to replace the old line management accounting. So Hoshin has many different meanings, one of which is this sort of ground-shaking event that, management accounting is dead, long live management accounting. It's being resurrected as something much more flexible, much more dynamic, and much more effective. For those of you who may not have seen the hour-long presentation about Hoshin that precedes this, I'm making the case that this radical decentralization that you see over here on the right makes organizations much faster. It makes it much easier for them to learn, defined as finding and fixing defects. I quote some of the originators of the theory of learning, of the learning organization. They say, what distinguishes a learning organization? That it finds defects and fixes them. Toyota is famous for finding and fixing defects almost in real time, and that's what this radical decentralization permits you to do. Think of the stop the line process, where people on the front line, the moment that they find something wrong, are capable of stopping or pausing the line in order to fix the condition, or maybe call for help if they can't do it on their own. Well, I'm sure this has raised many questions. Shoot them to me in an email. Catch me in the hallway, at the next company meeting, and we'll talk about it. I hope you've enjoyed this short presentation, and I look forward to your reactions to the new book when it finally goes to the publisher. Thanks so much.